Welcome back to the Robocars.com podcast. And today we'll talk about issues in the future of transportation and self-driving. And we have a guest, Ezra Goldman, who is CEO and founder of Upshift, a San Francisco company that's focused on novel ways to do car sharing. The word car sharing has many, many meanings, so we'll get into that. We'll talk about those things. But first, let's talk about some of the issues of the week. We've had actually a quieter than usual week for news. We had a lot of news in the prior weeks. We've seen several of the self-driving companies expand what they're doing. I thought maybe the most interesting thing to say, and I think it happened today, was that Cruise is now deploying some of their Origin custom-designed robotaxi vehicles in Austin. They're only going to be available for GM employees to ride in right now. They're doing some sort of game to get around the FMVSS, that's the NHTSA standard for safe cars, because only employees will be riding, I think, and they won't be charging money. But they do say that fairly soon they're going to let the public ride in that. And that's, probably the topic of a whole other show, which is whether or not the cars of the future should look like the cars of the past, whether they are cars, whether they follow the same principles that people had for cars, based on when people use them in different ways. So anyway, those will be interesting to see. Ed, I don't know if you have any thoughts on the Origin, Ezra, but
Yeah, well, I have long believed that there should be a new class of vehicles that get developed as a result of autonomous vehicle technology. And that, we really built our business model certainly around the idea that these new AV solutions would, in fact, develop new vehicles for getting around within the city for certain kinds of common trips. And then that there would still be a need for getting access to a full-size traditional car for other kinds of trips. If you want to go out of the city or drive high speeds or long distance or with a lot of people or a lot of stuff, those are the kinds of use cases where a car of today makes a lot of sense, but there's really an opportunity for new custom-built vehicles with autonomous vehicle technology that can be optimized around certain kinds of trips.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be getting into that. And I've been a priest of the idea of the right car for the trip, the right vehicle for the trip. In most cases, I think it's in a vehicle, and I don't know if I've mentioned on the podcast, but I've invested in, called the Nimbus, which is a very narrow vehicle on three wheels, 1 to 2 passengers. The second passenger is not as comfortable as you'd ideally like because it is a very small vehicle. But most trips are one person across town, and so the right vehicle for that is a vehicle of this size, which can park in a motorcycle spot and lane split, even if that's legal, which it is in California. So the Origin is the right vehicle for the trip if you, I think, have a social group. The seats faced back to or front to, they face each other. So that if you're in the front seats, you're facing backwards, which not everyone likes riding backwards, but nonetheless, it's a much nicer social environment to be, facing people and talking to them. It's actually also safer if you get in a forward crash, although you're hoping you never get in a forward crash. We've also seen Waymo get further in Los Angeles. They're now running vehicles with nobody in them in Los Angeles. They're not giving rides to anybody yet. But what this says is it's going to happen pretty soon. Waymo, of course, started in Chandler, a suburb of Phoenix, went to downtown San Francisco, went to downtown Phoenix, and now Los Angeles will be their next territory. And that's interesting, of course, one of the largest cities of the world, a very car-oriented city, although at the same time a city that has a fair bit of transit and other use of that sort, but a very sprawled city, which will be an interesting challenge for their technology. And Motional, a company that we don't hear about too much, has just expanded their own robotaxi pilot to include nighttime service, which is kind of interesting because Cruise only does the nighttime, and they got a permit that only allows them to drive at night, which is both easier for them. Obviously, there's much less traffic on the road. It's certainly easier to handle driving a city at night. Motional took the other way, and of course they run in Las Vegas, where the night is a very active time. At least the evening is a super active time in Las Vegas. But for one reason or another, did this reverse thing. And Cruise, by running only at night, is doing a favor to the city because in their early days of operation, they are still getting rid of rough edges. And they have found themselves stalling, blocking traffic for time to time. And obviously, you never want to do that when you're in real production. But if you're going to do it when you're learning how to drive, so to speak, it's better to do it at 2 a.m. than it is to do it at 5 p.m., that's for sure. And what was the last little the funny funny story of the week was a patent that was issued to, oh God, I don't even remember who it was. It was Ford? I can't remember. For self-repossessing cars. And the idea was that if you had a traditional car you bought with a car loan, and if you didn't make your payments today, well, if you saw the movie Repo Man, that was not entirely a realistic depiction of the business, but still a fun movie, by the way. It's an old movie, so many people may not have seen it. But anyway, a repo person would come and take the car away from you, and this is a challenge because people don't want their cars taken away, and so they'll like shoot at you and stuff, and that was what Repo Man was about. But of course, a self-driving car could repossess itself, and they decided to patent that, and everybody thought this was kind of Orwellian. Although I mentioned there's prior art, there are many people who have seen the not quite as old movie Minority Report, where Tom Cruise plays a police captain who is at this point wanted by the police. And while he's driving around, his car announces, "Oh, you have a new destination," and the new destination is your office, which is a nice touch because his office is the jail, and the car is taking him to jail. So that's a real repossession, and so that idea has been around for a while, but people got all excited because there was a patent about it. Now, companies write patents all the time; they don't intend to actually do. Any thoughts on those issues? And then we're going to get into car sharing.
Yeah, well, I think getting back to the origin, I think the other use case, of course, is shared rides across town, which Lyft and Uber have been doing for quite some time, especially before the pandemic, when people were a little less concerned about sharing rides with each other. We'll see how that shakes out in the future, but I think there's certainly an opportunity there for 1 to 4 passengers to share a ride in an autonomous micro bus, essentially. And there could also be other form factors as well, say 8 or 12 or even 16 passenger minivans. In terms of nighttime driving, I think there's certainly does simplify things quite a bit, although of course limits your use case and demand for your service, but obviously reduces a lot of your risk factors. Certainly something that we've been considering when we consider the rollout of autonomous with Upshift car deliveries.
Well, that's an important segue then, because I've asked you here because you've been plugging at this for a long time, trying to attack the problem of sharing vehicles in an efficient way and getting away from the traditional model where we all buy a car and keep it in our driveway, and hoping to gain some efficiency. Now, on that transit thing, though, San Francisco in particular has not recovered the way some other areas have when it comes to their public transit, which is partly because I think work from home has just become so much more popular here and stayed popular where it didn't in other places. But I've written a bunch about the quest. I haven't done the actual mathematical research that some nice academic who's watching should do if they want to, get a nice paper out of it, which is to actually calculate in the new world what is the most optimum vehicle size. Because traditional public transportation has been designed with very big vehicles because you need drivers. And if you don't need drivers, it turns out the most efficient size is not necessarily big. Everyone thinks, well, big is efficient, but no, because big means more empty seats when you have low demand. And those empty seats, of course, are not efficient. And so the most efficient size is actually the size that fills all the time, which is, in many cases, the right vehicle for the trip. But we're not talking more about car ownership rather than people riding together as a thrust of your business. I mean, I think it's obviously interesting to see if we can get people to ride together on the same trip and gain what efficiencies you gain from that, and also the reduction in the number of vehicles you need that you get from that. But your target, as I've understood the businesses that we've been talking about over the many years, is about that car in every garage that we've got. So you've built a business with some similar themes to some ideas I wrote over 15 years ago when I coined a term, which, I shouldn't say I coined it because I don't think it's become very popular, but I made up the term whistle car to refer to what I thought would be an interesting early robocar technology before we could get to where we now are very close to getting with a real robotaxi that can run around, that it might be nice to have a car that can deliver itself to you and then you drive it once you get in it. And the idea behind that is delivering a car to someone with no one in it is actually an easier problem. You can't kill anyone inside the car. You still have to be very nice to the people outside the car. But so the safety constraints are a little bit different, and the speed constraints are different. The car delivering itself isn't in the same sort of hurry as a passenger car is. It can take slower streets, easier streets, and that gives it opportunities. And the same has been applied to delivery robots like Starship and Neuro, which because they're carrying cargo, don't have to rush the same way people do. And so the problem becomes easier. Starship robots go 5 miles an hour. Obviously, humans would not tolerate that, but your groceries will. So the whistle car was from Roy Rogers whistling for Trigger. Because it seemed as though Roy Rogers, whenever he was out, he could just whistle, and his horse, no matter where he was, would come and take him for a ride. And I said, well, that would be great. I would like that too. Now, that horse belonged only to Roy, but of course, an actual whistle car would be a rental, temporary, short-term use car. But you did the driving, and so you didn't pay a driver, which is, of course, what brings the cost of Uber and Lyft and taxis up to a high number. So anyway, that's where I started. And you've been wanting to make that real. There's a couple other companies that have also been working to make that real for different levels of demand. So what's the core focus of Upshift?
Yeah, I mean, at Upshift, we believe that people in the future will subscribe to fleets of vehicles of various kinds for different kinds of use cases. So you might subscribe to something like the Origin for trips around town or maybe your daily commute. You might even own and operate your own micro-mobility vehicle, such as an e-scooter or a bike. Perhaps you would want to share it as well. It's sort of up to you, depending on how much you need it. And then rather than leasing a car, you would just subscribe to something like Upshift on an ongoing basis based on how often you needed access to it. And it would come to you on the days that you needed it, all clean and charged and ready to go. You would drive it to wherever it is you needed to go that day, or for a road trip, or however many days you need it. And then when you're done, you just drop it off somewhere in our service zone, walk away, and it's going to get clean and charged and serviced and ready for you for the next time you use it. And that experience would really be something unlike what we've seen today so far with rental car experiences, but it would actually be a personalized experience. So you'd actually get something that looks and feels like your car, more like a lease. So that if you're in Boston or New York or DC or San Francisco or whatever market you're in, you would have your car waiting for you at your disposal.
It's not the same car every time, though, right?
Not the exact same car, not the same plate or VIN or anything, but an identical make, model, trim, and then it would be personalized with your settings. So you can name your car, you can get your temperature, your controls, your drive mode, seats, lights, mirrors, all that kind of stuff can all be dialed in to your personal settings. With Upshift, we also provide accessories, so dog cover, surfboard rack, snow chains, things like that. But the idea is really that this is a virtual car in your pocket, that this is more like your car as opposed to simply a rental car on demand, which while I do see an opportunity there, and we can discuss kind of the distinction between the sort of initial whistle car idea and the fractional car subscription model that we're building out. Because we've actually tried both. We started out as more of a whistle car kind of a model and then transitioned into the subscription.
How far ahead do people order the cars?
Now or in the past?
No.
With the whistle car model. Now they typically will book it more than a day in advance. We'll get occasionally somebody will book less than a day in advance, but I would say it's 80-90% is more than a day in advance.
So it's no good for a sudden need, but it's good for, I know I'm going to drive.
Oh, we can deliver you. No, we can deliver you a car in 20 minutes, but we just don't see demand for it.
Okay.
Nobody does it. Not to say that perhaps they wouldn't if that were an easier thing to do, but we have never made restrictions on that. When we actually first started, we didn't put any restrictions. We just said, look, get a car in an hour, and as little as an hour, and we just didn't see that was actually where the demand was. The demand was more advanced, especially for current trips.
Uber is a car with a driver in 5 minutes. Zipcar is a car that you drive, but you have to walk 10 minutes, maybe if your city has got good density, or car to go in Europe, which is a service I've used there. I guess it's now they merged with the other one, and so now it's got a new name. Drive Now, I guess, or is that the other way around? Anyway, those kind of services. And then your thing in an hour, which, technically you can maybe get Enterprise to deliver a car to you in an hour as well. I don't know if they're usually that quick about it. And then, although there's sort of Uber to Hertz, which is something not very many people do.
So Enterprise doesn't deliver. What they do is they pick you up and bring you back.
Yeah, no.
Suffer with a bunch of people.
Yeah, in the
Absolutely.
ads, it looks like they're delivering. You want to really do that. And of course, the eventual
Yeah.
robotaxi. But do people want the same car each time? I mean, I sort of think I
Oh yeah,
like my zippy car for
100%.
when I'm going to drive in the mountains, and I'd like a pickup truck when I'm going to the hardware store. Do I want the same car every time?
Yes. The more you drive, the more you want the same car. That has been our experience. Whether you're interviewing people who use Zipcar frequently, which we did, or if you're looking at just behavior on our platform, I would say 9 times out of 10, people take the same car. If they're so, we have currently a Prius hybrid and a Rav4 hybrid. We have recently added a Tesla Model 3 as well as a Hyundai Ioniq 5 to the platform. Still kind of in early days in terms of getting those out into the field and to our members. But certainly looking at our historic data on the Prius and the RAV4, basically what we see is if you want the RAV4, you want the RAV4, and you probably don't really want the Prius. Then you have other people who really prefer the Prius, and they'll take the RAV4 if they need it for some reason, like they're going to Tahoe or they're going to the hardware store or whatnot. And then you have some other people kind of in the middle who like they don't really care. Either way is fine. Whatever you got, send it my way. And I'd say those are the kind of things that we've been seeing. But generally speaking, I would say people tend to have a preference. They tend to book the same one every time. And the feedback that we've gotten consistently has been that's a differentiator
Hmm.
is getting the same car.
It's not the same color, is
Because
it?
when you go to it used to be when we first launched, they were all white. And then we had trouble with the constraints from vehicle supply where they just said, look, you can get whatever, you can't always get the same color. So you get the same trim, but that was the best we could do. And what we found when we were doing all white was that people would think they were getting the same car each time, literally the same car. They thought that
Well,
this
they
was
couldn't
like
keep their
their
stuff in
car.
it.
Well, they couldn't keep their stuff in it, but they could get the exact same white Prius with black interior or whatnot, and they wouldn't know the difference. They would keep asking us, "Hey, is this the same car I got last week?" And that actually is a differentiator if you think about it compared to say Zipcar, rental car, or any of these other services out there, because the more it feels like your car, the more it is truly a lease alternative, right? And so a
Yeah.
lease alternative means it's consistent, it's reliable, it's guaranteed to be available, it's the same car every time. You know exactly what you're getting. And there's some additional value prop of like, you can get a RAV4 when you want, if that's what you want. But generally speaking, what we found is people want consistency and predictability.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely, if I know I'm doing a shopping trip or a mountain trip, I would definitely take the RAV4 over the Prius. Now, I have the Tesla, and I like driving that in the mountains, even though charging can sometimes still have some compromises when you're going out into rural
Yeah.
country. Although I've managed to make it work, and I think in the future, charging an electric car on your country trips won't really be much of an issue. But today, we're still in a transition phase. But that's kind of interesting. Now, of course, you don't get to keep your stuff in it, which is something which I must admit I'm guilty of. My trunk is full of stuff
Yeah.
and all sorts of little things that I like to have with me all the time. And the other thing that I guess I mean, I shouldn't like this, but I like it, which is I don't have to clean it when I get out of it. I can clean it later. I mean, I do clean it, but certainly less than I should, and certainly not every time I take a trip in it. So
Do you
how are
enjoy
people
cleaning it?
reacting to that? Hmm?
Well, so I would say there's one thing is that we clean it, so you don't ever have to clean
Okay.
it.
No, now I love it.
So I mean that's a big value prop. The other value prop that we have over some of the other shared mobility solutions is because it's a subscription, and these are people who are using it week after week. They're using it, 1 or 2 days a week, typically, every week or pretty close to it. And so, if you forget something, your garage door opener or sunglasses or whatever in the car, typically people will text us and say, "Hey, I forgot such and such the car, my sunglasses or whatever." And we'll say, "Yeah, okay, we found them in the car. We'll bring them back next time."
I like that.
And
And
so it's not quite the same as leaving your stuff in your car and just kind of letting it sit there in the front, but I think it's certainly a heck of a lot better than I lost it in my rental car and I'll never see it again. Getting
so
your stuff delivered to you the next week is a huge value prop.
and the seats are in the position I like, and the mirrors in the position I like, and the radio stations are
Well,
programmed to the stations I listen to. If anyone listens to the
so
radio
some,
anymore.
yeah, well, good, fair question. So not the seats, the lights, and mirrors. That's something that we need API integration directly with an automaker, which we are working on.
No. You could
advancing
have the
that.
dude who sets up the car could actually,
No, sorry. So radio station, radio station and temperature we're doing manually. So it's actually in the app. You can name your car, your car. It's not actually your car, but you can name the Prius and you can name the RAV4. You can set your radio station preferences, and our concierge will set it up for you with that radio station playing. You can set your temperature, you can set your drive mode, and you can set which phone cable you'd like us to plug in. Now, obviously, we're moving in the direction of wireless connection, full API integration, so this could all be automated. That's the direction we want to head in, but for the moment, that's what we're able to do. But yeah, the idea is that it would be set up the way you like it each time.
Yeah, I mean, I've always wondered why companies like Hertz didn't do something like that decades ago. Like they, work with the car companies. They buy 10,000 cars from the car company. They say, look, just give us a car where we can preload the parameters of our customer, and customers would love it. And it never happened. Tesla has actually finally done that. Tesla now has a thing where if they're giving you a loaner Tesla, it knows, like for a Tesla, your phone is the key to the car. And not everyone has that yet, but Tesla has that. So literally you go up to your loaner Tesla and your phone already unlocks it. And it's as though it looks exactly like yours from terms of internal setting. And of course, because they have a completely software controlled car, which they control all of the software, they can pull that off, and other people have been slower to pull it off. So let's get to the big hard question of sharing, because sharing is it's one of those motherhood issues that everyone talks about, saying clearly the only reason to do all this is because we're going to share. Oh, your car sits parked 95% of the time. Clearly that's a horrible waste, right? And we have all this steel that gets into them. And it's, anyway, everyone loves sharing. They want to share rides. The term ride share, of course, now has too many meanings, but they want to share cars. And here's the math that made me wonder about that proposition, which is to say that when you have today's cars last about 20 years in California, and they go about 200,000 miles, a little 10 to 12,000 miles a year. Average is about 10. It's more in the first 5 years of the car's life, and a little bit less as the car gets older. And so the car is wearing out by the year and by the mile about the same time, which is how it's designed, not too surprising. Now, taxis, on the other hand, they wear out in 5 years. And they drive in New York City, taxis, for example, or heavily used Ubers. They're doing 60,000 miles a year, or even 80,000 miles a year. And they're wearing out in just 5 years when they hit their mileage number. Once you're wearing out by the mile, once the life of the car is measured in miles and not in years at all, because these taxis, and these heavily shared cars, all wear out by the mile long before their normal year lifetime, when they sit garaged 95% of the time, the thing that everyone complains about. Well, then sharing doesn't do anything for you, because the number of cars you need to build is equal to the number of miles the cars last divided by the number of miles people go, or the other way around. And there's no how many people share it isn't a coefficient in the equation. The only thing that how many people share it changes is how many cars have to physically exist in the city, i.e. how much parking has to physically exist in the city. And a little bit about the recycling of the things which last much longer than the core components of the car. So you want to make sure if the car wears out in 200,000 miles in 5 years, and there's a lot of stuff in there that would last for 20 years, you want to recycle that and reuse it in other vehicles. But the sharing factor is much smaller part of this than I think most people assume when they talk about it. So is it actually worth it?
Well, I think it depends on the business model. So you were talking about ride sharing. Well, ride sharing.
No, I'm talking about car sharing. I'm talking about plain old. I mean, taxi is not ride sharing, other than to the.
I can't speak
ride
to other business models because we don't operate a Zipcar fleet. Our particular business model, we take cars that otherwise would have been driven about 6,000 miles, and we get people to drive about 4,500 miles, and then we split it 4 ways. That's more or less how it works. I'd say it's about 4 members per car, but it's actually 3.3, 3.5 accounts per car. So our cars are actually only getting driven about 15,000 miles per year anyway. And I think even if we get them really cranking the way that we'd like them to be, and they were going out all the time as much as possible, probably maybe 20,000 miles a year, but I don't think maybe at some point we get to full AV and the cars are, frequently, they're going out 3 times in the same day or something. Maybe we get them up to 50, 60,000 miles, but that's still pretty far away. I mean, what we're looking at with our current business model is more like 15, 16,000 miles. And, and we'll serve it, we'll let them go when they hit like 30, 40, 50,000 miles, kind of depending on a variety of factors on the financing side. But essentially, when we turn them back into dealerships, they're like, oh, this is a great low mileage car. I mean, they don't see any issue with it at all, and they give us a more than fair price for it. So I think it depends on the business model, because different models definitely have very different wear and tear and very different utilization curves and different utilization amounts. My understanding is that your sort of traditional Zipcar model, rather than 4 members per car, they've got 50 or 100 members per car, but they're still only doing 15,000 miles a year, I think, because those members are basically just going to Costco once a month, and they're still not doing a ton of miles on the car anyway.
Well, yeah, you have hit on one of the things in the equation which can make sense. If you're talking about low usage cars, then sharing them has a lot more benefit in that equation.
Exactly.
If you're talking about, so this would never really be something that would be done by the kind of person who is one of these 12,000 mile a year average American drivers.
Well, I think it would be for a secondary car, right? So there's a lot of people who have 3 cars and 2 drivers kind of scenario, where they don't really need that third car.
I mean, I have that, but it's just a legacy thing. We've just got a 20-year-old car that we haven't bothered to be rid of. We don't actually do anything much with it.
Sure. Well, you and 20% of Americans, because
well, maybe, yeah.
There's 1.2 cars. Well, there's 1.2 cars per licensed driver, right?
Yeah.
And our thought is, no matter how much you think the car can or should be utilized, you can't possibly drive 2 cars at the same day, at the same time. And so there's not really any reason for you to own more cars than you could possibly drive at once. And so there's one primary car you could be driving, and then there's fractional cars that you could be using.
Today, the old junker that we've still got is a Forester, and which is it's like a mini SUV. So that is the car for the trip to Home Depot. But that's about all.
I think a fractional SUV is a fantastic solution. I mean, I think frankly, you should probably own that little. I forget the name of it. The Nimbus.
The Nimbus, yeah.
You called it.
Oh, I do.
Own a Nimbus and do a fractional lease on some massive behemoth SUV that you take to the hardware store and take to Tahoe. I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's why we're building them. I mean, for people who live in San Francisco, where parking is really hard to find, so this thing, because it parks in motorcycle spots, like it's always park it. Mm-hmm. And I would love that. I hate looking for parking in San Francisco. It's terrible. And I'm sure that when the guys deliver your cars, they probably hate trying to find where they're going to deliver the car. Because you currently, right, you're using human delivery. Your goal is to move to remote operated delivery, as I believe you told me. We're getting ahead of ourselves.
Correct. Right now we basically have bicycle couriers. So you fold the seats down, throw a bike in the back, and deliver the car, and then you bike to your next destination. Typically doing about 1.5 miles on average between jobs. But obviously with the teleoperations, we have demand all up and down the Bay Area. I mean, down in Palo Alto, Corte Madera, somebody just requested us to expand last week. Fremont, Hayward, San Jose, I mean, everywhere. And so even though some of those neighborhoods are 5 or 10 times lower density than where we are right now, and so the distances between every destination is going to be considerably larger. So instead of having, let's say a 1 to 4 mile delivery distance, maybe we could get to 5 to 10 mile delivery distance with teleoperations, because you have no downtime, right? So you deliver the car and then you're immediately jump in the next car and start delivering that. And so whereas with us, you have to take the bike out, you got to get to the next car. And so if that's more than a 15-minute ride away, it starts to make less and less sense to do that. So the teleoperations fundamentally for us enable us to scale out to lower density markets where we see demand, but with current operational limitations, it's just difficult to execute on the demand.
But it also would hopefully save you costs. I mean, because the labor of a bike courier is high. Although, I mean, that's the thing I've been wondering about, because you are having to have a cleaning crew go through every car.
It's the same.
Yeah, I mean, and
there's
no robot. There's no robot cleaning yet. I mean, even the robotaxis, this is one of the issues they haven't resolved, which is when you throw up in the back of an Uber, he doesn't like it, he or she doesn't like it, but the Uber driver then has to clean their own car, and maybe they can ding you or get some money from you. When you throw up in the back of a robotaxi, They're going to see it. They're probably going to have a camera that's going to look and say, "Hey, you threw up." They're going to tell the car, "Take yourself to a car wash."
Get a customer complaint. The next person who gets in the car
Well,
is
no,
going
no,
to
they're going to
flag
tell.
it.
Well, yeah, if they deliver that car to someone and says, "I don't want this car; it's full of puke," obviously they're going to say that, and they'll send you another car. That's that's a delay.
Yeah.
They'll probably give you. I'm guessing what'll happen. I'm hoping that they'll know that there's puke in the car, and the car will go to the depot and get cleaned. But if for some reason they do send that to another customer, the customer's going to say, "This is an unacceptable car," and they're going to get $5 off or something, and ding the guy who threw up the $5. I mean, that's would make a lot of sense. But that's an interesting question, which is how do you pay for the cost of that? Because today that cost is kind of built in. It's one of the sort of unknown costs, and robotaxi business models are a theme here, and we'll be having many shows talking about some of the issues around that. And your business model, though, touches on some of the same issues, although in an earlier way. You've got these human beings delivering and cleaning the cars, but of course, you're not paying for a driver like Uber or a taxi is, because the person does that. I mean, I would like to just own one car and use either a car like yours or robotaxis for a second vehicle for those times when both of us need to be going somewhere in a car. But we're not at that world yet, but that's the world I want to go to. Eventually, living in the city, I think I'd be very happy with just robotaxi, with the addition of something for road trips. Robotaxi won't be the great answer for any kind of long country road trip. It's going to have to be a rental car or Upshift kind of car or anything of that sort. I mean, Upshift really is a rental car in many ways. It's just with a nicer UI.
Yeah, I think it's the consistency and predictability that you don't get from rental cars. So one of the things, for example, that we find a lot of people we get a lot of people who come from rental car experiences to Upshift. I can't think of anybody who's canceled Upshift and gone to a rental car experience. Whenever anybody cancels, they invariably end up just leasing or buying a car. And typically when they're coming to us from a more of a rental car experience or a car share solution, they've had a number of issues. It's very expensive, it's inconvenient, the car is dirty, or it's unavailable. It's a really huge problem. And so they start looking to lease a car, and they start Googling like car subscription. We actually don't use the word car share anywhere on our website. We frame ourselves as a car subscription service.
Sure.
Fractional car subscription service, if you like.
Timeshare.
And they will find us through a Google search, for example, and say, "Oh, that's actually better than leasing a car." And then when they do eventually cancel, it's usually because some lifestyle change, right? They got a job that does require that they commute more frequently, or they moved out of San Francisco, or maybe they had a kid and now they want to move somewhere with more space. Typically those are the times where we see people churn off the platform. And so I don't think that they're fully comparable. I certainly wouldn't think of Upshift as a rental car solution. We did actually, when we first launched, we initially wanted to be a co-ownership model. Could you and I co-own a vehicle together? And, as we kind of marched down that path and interviewed a bunch of people, we realized there's all this sort of obvious problems with that, of like somebody throws up in the backseat, whatever, the car comes back dirty, it's damaged, what's that new maintenance issue? Like, who's going to take it in for service? I mean, all of those kinds of issues. And then of course the availability, right? You and I want it on the same day. And so eventually you kind of, get back to, well, there needs to be a fleet operator, fleet manager who's taking care of all these friction points, managing availability. You need access to multiple vehicles, not just one, so that, you have availability throughout the platform. And then the delivery really came about because obviously we're looking at autonomous and teleoperations, but also because, you and I might not live across the street from each other. We might live across town. And so right now we have members all around San Francisco, but we're able to service it with, a fraction of the number of cars that we would need on any kind of traditional car sharing platform, because we're constantly moving the cars back and forth across the city and driving about twice as high utilization off the fleet as a traditional car share platform would, and doing it with probably like a tenth of as many cars as we would need if we were to just kind of park cars somewhere and, kind of hope people walked there when they needed it. Because, it enables us to have much more flexibility and much more availability, and obviously reduces a lot of the other issues that we have, right? Because let's say you have the car and you've decided you want to extend it another day. Well, if I were on a Zipcar platform, I would have booked that exact car for the day you wanted to extend it into. And so then the platform would tell you, sorry, you can't extend, or they'd have to bump me into another car. It's
Yeah.
there's a lot of friction in there. Whereas with our model, the cars are all identical. So if you want to extend, the next member who we've offered a car to, we just reassign them to a different car that's identical. They're none the wiser, and everybody's happy. You get to keep your car another day.
Sure.
I still get the car. And then
If
there's
you have
the other
the
parts.
inventory to, if you have the, obviously, if
Of
you
course,
get too many
but
people asking, and well, what do you do when you hit peak demand? Do you tell people no car for you?
yeah. So this weekend we actually hit peak this weekend because we had a rainy Sunday and a not so rainy Saturday, so everybody wanted the car on Saturday, and so we had about 10% over capacity, and there were a couple of those people that we weren't able to satisfy the demand, and some of them just said, well, it was kind of a last minute thing. Oh well, too bad for me. And because usually it's the people who book an hour in advance who don't get a car, and they're usually like, well, I should have booked earlier if I wanted a car that day. And but if they really need to go somewhere, they've got something critical to go, then we'll just compensate them for going to some other solution, rideshare, car share,
So
rental
you'll
car,
give them
a
a discount coupon at Hertz or something.
No, we'll just pay them, basically deduct 1 day of credit from their account, because we
Sure.
so we didn't really talk about the business model, but it's you pay a monthly price, and then you get 4, 8, or 12 days of credits every month, and then those days roll over if you don't use them, and you can pay for additional days if you need to go on a longer trip or need more days for some reason. And so what we'll do is we'll just deduct the day of credit, but then you send us your bill from wherever you went, and we'll pay for up to $100 for that day. And that's been a pretty good solution for most people, because they get to where they're going. It ends up being a fairly reasonable solution all around. And it doesn't really cost us that much because we already got paid for the day. So there's some nominal sort of penalty for not having a car for you, and we don't want to do it too often, but that at least gets you to where you're going. And so you feel like you have that peace of mind that you will get to where you need to go when you need to get there. And that's something that no other platform really provides right now. Like if you go to a rental car solution and you go to Hertz, I mean, they could care less if you get to where you're going. Like if they're out of cars, out of cars, too bad for you, right? And so there's no incentive structure there baked in. So, and same with car share. Like they don't really do anything.
There's a very fascinating question which is unresolved in the robotaxi world about whether or not robotaxis will be fleet owned. Or whether, like Waymo, they own all their cars and they send them out to you. Or the idea that people will buy cars which have self-driving ability, and then, like Uber, when they're not using their car, they'll put it to work for them, hiring itself out to other people, giving rides. And that actually is Uber in a way, but except you don't have to do the driving, so that's a nice part of it. And I used to think there'd be a lot of that. In fact, I'm sort of one of the originators of that. This car sharing concept. It's an article I wrote, and then students of mine created a company called GetAround, which you're familiar with, I'm sure, which is car sharing with privately owned cars. And Turo is a very similar company, which is doing well. They're both public now, but their valuation of GetAround is not very good right now. But anyway, I'm hoping they do well with it. But then I started noticing as I stayed in Airbnbs, which are different from cars, but a lot of similarities, that most of the Airbnbs I stay in now are fleet Airbnbs, shall we say. They're owned by somebody who owns multiple properties. Well, Airbnb was supposed to be, somebody letting you use their apartment when they're not in it, and they're making some extra money from it, or even staying in a room. And that was the ideal of the airbed, in fact, which is what the name Airbnb is from. Not everyone knows that anymore. And it's turned out to be, it's just been a different way to structure a hotel, really, or a rental apartment. And I'm thinking cars might end up the same way. Because Elon Musk actually, he incorrectly preaches that any day now he will have a real robotaxi full self-driving service for your Tesla. And if he could pull that off, then yes, there'd be 4 million Teslas out on the road, able to be temporarily hired out when they're not being used by their owner, assuming you keep it clean and all the other things that would be necessary for doing that. But I'm starting to think, though, that it's probably mostly going to be fleet-oriented, just like the Airbnbs, that there are certain smaller economic factors that push that way. And anyway, it sounds like Upshift has run into the same decision.
Yeah, I mean, we've put our cars on to GetAround and Turo, and we pulled them off because it was just such a headache to deal with. Having 3 parties involved in any transaction is kind of a nightmare, because anything that goes sideways now, I'm suddenly not only interacting with the customer, but I'm also interacting with this third-party intermediary, and I got to go through whatever their processes and channels are, and they've got to get a cut of whatever transaction, and there's just too much friction involved in all of that. And I think you can certainly look up on YouTube, people who have had cars on Turo or Get Around, and all the sort of obvious problems you can imagine. Car comes back dirty or damaged, and now I got to go deal with it. And it's not really a lot of fun to be a fleet operator, to be honest. Like, there's a lot of heavy challenges to deal with that your average car owner didn't really go into business to be a rental car operator. Like, they just want to get to work every day, right? So I think there's a lot of challenges there that I think people are not really acknowledging when they kind of brush over that general idea that everybody would want to do that. And then of course there's the added challenge that you mentioned of, is FSD ever going to get to the point where it really could provide that? And
I have lots of videos about that. We won't solve that one today.
I'm sure you do. In my general sense, which I assume is similar to yours, is that I think you're going to need a heck of a lot more hardware on the cars than Elon Musk is putting on his, and it makes a lot more sense to be a Cruise or a Waymo and integrate everything fully into a custom built vehicle such as Origin, and build everything around that being exactly the solution, and make a fleet operator that can quickly clean the car and service it and charge it and zip it back out on the road and keep it cranking and fully utilized. You're just never going to get that out of your average person just kind of putting a car in the garage. And so I think that's really the future that I see, and the future that we're building towards. And then of course with teleoperations, we think that you can get that up and running this year, instead of however many years down the road before we get to like a full self-driving technology solution, and with much lighter weight technology on the car, just something that's maybe a few $1,000s instead of hundreds of thousands.
But if Waymo and Cruise and maybe even Tesla produce a really good robotaxi service that deals with all of San Francisco Bay Area or beyond, and it's priced at a price which is not the price of an Uber, which is today is $2 a mile or so, but it's priced closer to the price of ordinary car ownership, 50 to 80 cents a mile. Can Upshift survive in that world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that reality is pretty unlikely for a variety of reasons. I mean, first of all, for the reasons we mentioned before, Cruise and Waymo, I think they're much more likely to develop something like Origin that's really optimized for intra-city trips, right? So 3 miles or less, going 25 miles an hour around city streets.
So briefly, most of your customers leave town with the car?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, our average trip is 75 miles a day.
Oh, okay.
We'll go 2 days. So our average trip is 150 miles.
All right.
Yeah. So just to kind of clarify, so obviously people will take our car to Costco as well, but I mean, that's not the core use case for our demographic. That's Zipcar's core demographic. And I think Zipcar is probably really in bad shape if that happens, the kind of scenarios you're talking about. But that's not what we're building towards. Like I said, our average driver is going, 5 days a month and 4,500 miles per year. So they're driving, very little by comparison to, say, your average US driver, but about 10 times as much as your average car share driver, who's driving 300 to 500 miles a year, and maybe once a month, which is basically a trip to Costco once a month to go load up on groceries. I mean, that's basically your typical Zipcar use case. And so our average driver, usually they have some kind of anchor use case that is not a daily commute, but is something they like to do on a somewhat regular, let's say, weekly basis, right? So any kind of outdoor activity, golfing, skiing, surfing, hiking, going to the beach. I mean, any of these kinds of outdoor activities are very challenging to do if you don't have access to a car. And if you like to do that on a regular basis, because that's an activity you enjoy, you kind of need a car for that. And it's just enough hassle and headache to deal with, and cost, frankly, to deal with rental car and car share for that kind of use case, which was actually the reason I started the company, because I like to go hiking on the weekends and I didn't want to bother with these other problems with these other companies. And then you have personal relationships, right? So if your mom lives an hour away, or your girlfriend or boyfriend or fiance or whoever, then that's a reason you would need to drive there in most cases. And then the third typical scenario is increasingly a hybrid commute. So people are working from home most days, but they're going into the office now 1, 2, 3 days a week. And we actually have quite a number of our members who hardly ever take the car out on the weekends. They're just taking it out, Tuesdays and Thursdays, or whatever day of the week it is they go into the office that week. They're just using it to commute, and they don't really use it on the weekend at all. So those are the kind of use cases that we see, and people do go to Costco, of course, but that's more like just something they tack on to something else they were doing otherwise. They're coming back from the office and they swing by Costco. I mean, they certainly do that, but they don't take a car just to go to Costco.
Have you forecast what you think the world of the future is like? Like, what percentage of people continue to own a car? What percentage of people like fractional car ownership? What percentage of people are very happy with the robotaxis for all of their, or almost all their transportation needs?
I would say in a city like San Francisco, it's about a third of each. So it's a pretty clean divide. There's about a third of the people who would basically keep doing what they're doing right now with car share and ride share and e-scooters and whatnot, and you would basically just automate that and make a better version of the vehicle with Origin, etc. And those people would just keep on doing that. And then you have another third of the population who are going to own a car. They're going to drive it every day. Maybe they have to commute every day for some reason. And they might still use some of these solutions for certain kinds of trips where they just don't want to deal with parking their car on the other end of the trip typically, or maybe they're drinking and don't want to drive. So there's certain kind of use cases there where they might use one of these alternatives, but they're still going to own a car, park it in their garage, drive it every day kind of a person. And then there's about a third who are in the middle right now that are in, and when I say a third, what I mean is it's actually half of all cars in a city like San Francisco, because a third of them don't own cars and are doing car share and everything else. And so it's about half of all the cars in a major city like San Francisco that could or should be doing something more like a fractional car subscription, where they're only driving a couple days a week because they have some use case that really requires that they have a car, or they just had a car from their last. They got their mom's car when they were in college and they moved to San Francisco, and whatever, they already have the car, so they just keep it and they use it a couple times here and there, but they don't really need it. And then when they do get to a point where they're thinking of getting a car, they're like, okay, look, I don't want to keep doing this.
So are you popular with families, the kind of people who buy minivans?
No.
Because they like to fill the minivan with all the kids' things and stuff. They've said, many mothers and fathers have said to me, robotaxis just aren't going to cut it for me because I have this minivan with 3 strollers and 6 car seats and everything else. And they don't see a taxi service.
No, I mean, I would say that we're better than other solutions for families. I have a kid myself, and I would say the biggest challenge is really the car seat. Putting the car seat in and out is really a pain in the butt. And the one advantage I would say from our model is that the car at least comes to your door, and so you don't have to haul your car 4 blocks to the Zipcar or like down halfway across town, like to imagine like renting a car with a kid, and you've got a car seat, and you're gonna like put your car seat in an Uber or a taxi, go across town, take the car seat out of the car, put the car seat into the car rental, like,
or
you got to have one of the
experience,
or you got to have your parent, one of the parents goes down to Hertz or whatever, gets the car, brings it back. I mean, all these kinds of things are friction, right? And so we do have some parents with kids with car seats, but it is definitely an added step. They got to put the car seat in each time, but we do at least bring it to their door, and that definitely reduces some of that. So
it's the younger urban people. You're not getting the grandmas. You're getting the. You could call it Upshift, but you probably wouldn't want to do that.
No. We are actually, some of our best members are 55 to 65, empty nesters.
That's me.
So what we see is like yourself. So we basically see late 20s to early 40s, and then sort of 55 plus, so 55 to 65. Which, to be fair, also sort of correlates with the demographic of San Francisco, that a lot of people, when they're in their 40s, they have kids and they move to the East Bay or somewhere that they can get more space.
Have you had any parents buy an Upshift subscription for the 16-year-old?
Yes. Well, not 16, because we don't allow 16. We were 25 plus, but definitely have had parents. We technically can do 21, but the insurance premium is kind of prohibitive, so we've capped it at 25. But we have had parents, buy a birthday present or a Christmas present and say, hey, instead of buying my kid a car, I'm going to buy him an Upshift membership. And we've definitely seen that.
Well, it's interesting because, in fact, the insurance problem is a big problem for the 16 to 25s. They can't rent cars
Yeah.
easily, and they can't always afford to buy a car, or many of them can't afford to buy a car. And so there's actually a sort of a big opportunity in serving those people. The trick would be to find an insurance company that was willing to talk about this, because when it's one rental car, it's a little hard to insure this teenager's going to drive this rental car. They're probably going to crash it. I want to charge a lot of money to cover that. But if you actually get to sit and evaluate this teen, like when you buy a car as a teenager, insurance is expensive, but you get the opportunity to try for every discount that you. When I was that age, they gave me a good student discount. I had good grades, so they gave me quite a cut on my insurance. And by the way, wave out to State Farm there. You got a customer for 50 years by giving him a discount when he was 20. So there's a lot of virtue in that for companies like that. So I don't know. But the insurance is obviously going to be a barrier.
Yeah, I mean, we did have the 21 as the cutoff point when we initially launched, because that was what the insurance allowed. And we discontinued 21 to 25 for two reasons. One, honestly, we didn't have very many members at that age, very few. And two, those people tended to drive more, and we were paying mileage based, so it was more expensive for us. And then three, the insurance was, increased premium per mile for those people. So we just cut it out entirely, because we're like, we don't want to bother with the extra risk, and we don't want to bother with the extra cost, and it's not really that much of our customer base anyway, so forget it. So we just did 25. And honestly, I think 30 something is kind of a good sweet spot, as well as, like I said, the empty nesters are fantastic for us, because they're lower risk. They're not like trying to see the state of California, and drive, thousands of miles. They're typically doing pretty banal stuff like getting to work and, just getting around town and doing, everyday stuff. And they're very responsible. Typically, they're good to work with. If there's any issue that comes up, they work with us on it. And they've been some of our, biggest accounts, that spend the most, and they really value what we offer. But I think in part because the older people have had more experience, and so they've used rental car, they've used car share, they've bought a car, they know the hassles and headaches of all of those different options. And if you solve that for them, they're happy to pay for it and say, look, this is a value. Like, I love the fact that if the car gets damaged, you're the one who has to go and repair it, not me.
And I think the good user experience of getting it delivered is a pretty important part of your company. And here in the United States and Canada, we've gotten used to the fact that the rental car companies actually, at least at the airport, sort of have it figured out. You just walk out of your flight, you walk up into the rental car lot, and you grab any car at many of the companies, and you drive away. And that's actually a very good experience, much better than it used to be. If you try and rent a car in the Middle East or a lot of places around the world, there's half an hour of paperwork. Even if you're one of the elite members. I don't know why the other countries haven't figured that out, but there's a lot to be improved in the user experience of sharing cars. Now, I'm, of course, more interested in when the cars drive themselves, and this is an intermediate path along the way there. And it does, of course, mimic some of that, because the price does not include having to pay a driver, which is what Uber does, since Uber is similar to robotaxi, except for you're paying somebody. But your delivery is today done by human beings, so it's not very high tech, but it could be in the future something that does make use of the technology and give us these early tastes. So I'm going to thank you for coming by, Ezra, or virtually coming by, and we'll be tracking to see what happens. What city is next for Upshift?
We're looking at the DC market. That's the next big opportunity, beyond just expanding the Bay Area, of course. And I will say that we do have technology. We don't have, it's not high tech in the sense of not Cruise and Waymo, but we have a delivery logistics app, we have a back-end logistics app, we have member app, we have telematics in the car, so you can locate, unlock, and drive the car with a keyless push button start.
Small matter of program.
And then, of course, and then we're, of course, integrating remote vehicle teleoperations, so you can get the car delivered with a drive-by-wire system. So there's a significant amount of technology that we're developing sort of from the bottom up to facilitate the delivery process. And doing that in a way that is streamlined and efficient is no trivial task, as I'm sure you can imagine.
I definitely believe you. Definitely believe you. Anyway, thanks for being here. And I'm Brad Templeton from Robocars.com. We've been with Ezra Goldman of Upshift, talking about fractional car ownership. Maybe car sharing, as you say, isn't a phrase you use, but different ways that people will pay for and own and make business models for vehicles in the future.